Minister determined to swipe high-tech jobs from London. Since then, of course, he's torn up the political rulebook and romped to a historic victory in the French presidential elections. With Angela Merkel struggling in Germany, President Macron is widely seen as the leader in Europe. And this week, he came to talk defence and the migrant crisis with Theresa May at the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst. I caught up with him there and I began by asking him whether he thought our Prime Minister could secure the deep and special partnership with the EU that she talks of.
I do hope. Because I think it will be good for the EU and for UK.
She said a deep relationship, however. If the UK is, I imagine your view is, if the UK is not going to be a member of the customs union or the single market or accept the four freedoms, it can't be that deep.
Look, it will be by definition less deep than today, because the deepest possible relation is being a member of the European Union. So I think you have to be lucid, okay, and you have to be fair with people. As you decided to leave, you cannot be part of the single market. But in function of the nature of the negotiation, you can have some deeper relations than some others. For instance, we have a deeper relation with Norway than the one we have with Canada. So it depends on the outcome of this negotiation. But for sure, except if you change your mind, but you will not be part of the single market, as you will not be part of the European Union.
And in concrete terms, let's talk about what that might mean. Now, you've said in the past you can have Canada or you can have Norway, but you can't have your own special deal. Is that really fair, given how long Britain has been part of the EU?
No, it's not a question to be fair or unfair. I take that as a reference, but for sure you will have your own solution. And my willingness, and
so there will be a bespoke special solution for Britain.
Sure, but you will. I take these two references because this special way should be consistent with the preservation of the single market and our collective interests. And you should understand that you cannot, by definition, have the full access to the single market if you don't tick the box. And to get full access to the single market, you need contribution to the budget, and you have to accept
the freedoms.
The freedoms and the four pillars, and you have to accept the jurisdiction. As soon as you decide not to join these preconditions, it's not a full access. So it's something perhaps between this full access and a trade agreement. But what's important is not to make people think or believe that it's possible to have
your cake and eat it.
Exactly.
So when I talk to David Davis, our main Brexit negotiator, and I say, what does Britain really want out of this, David? He says, we want Canada plus, plus, plus. And by plus, 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 he means a deal on services, because so much of the UK economy is based on services in general and on the city in particular. From what you've said today, I guess that you don't believe we can have any special deal involving the city.
I mean, you don't just speak about services, but you speak about financial services. Cooking a deal is a job of Michel Barnier. We have a very dedicated organization. I don't want to start a negotiation country by country. It will be ridiculous and the best way to dismantle the whole EU. I think what we have to do, and what we will do, is first to take the decision in March regarding the mandate we want to give to Michel Barnier to negotiate. Afterwards, he will have to negotiate with your negotiator. And they will decide, and it depends on proposals made by the UK. But for sure, full access for financial services to the single market is not feasible given the functioning of the single market. So by definition, it's not a full access.
So in concrete terms, some form of passporting deal is off the table in these negotiations as far as you're concerned?
I'm not the one to negotiate, and I don't want to close doors, but it depends on what you're ready to put on the table in terms of precondition. If you respect the precondition to get access to single market, it's feasible, but there is no cherry picking in the single market. I mean, if I have to wrap up the full philosophy, no cherry picking in the single market, because it's not feasible, because otherwise that's the dismantling of the single market. And for me, it's one of the pillars of the European Union and something you loved in the past.
And you say that you're not negotiating, and that's absolutely right. But you were very much saying that one of the consequences of Brexit, you thought, was to reaffirm Paris's centrality in the financial system. And France has made a very, very strong pitch to British financial institutions to come over to Paris. How is it going?
In terms of European dialogue on financial services, but for sure, we want to attract the maximum activity. Why? Because this decision has an impact for a lot of players. So a lot of players will decide to be part of the EU and the Eurozone. And have to choose between different countries. So there is a competition between different countries.
Of course there is. I suppose the case for the city is that it has built up a very big part of the whole global financial system. And to unplug the city from the rest of the European financial structure is a big risk and a danger.
Look, I think, first of all, it's absolutely not my willingness, and I think not a reasonable perspective. Second, it's something to be taken into consideration by your negotiator and your own proposals. But my willingness is not precisely to unplug, as you say, the British city. I think it doesn't make sense, because it's part of the whole financing of our European Union. But for sure, if there is no change in terms of full access to the financial single market, it doesn't make sense for the other. So I want to preserve what we created post-World War. And what we created is this sophisticated organization called the European Union, which is for the very first time not an hegemony of one on the others, but a very concrete, democratic, economic, and human constructions.
Why do you think the British voted to leave this sophisticated structure?
Look, I'm not the one to judge or to comment the decision of your people, but my interpretation is that a lot of losers of this new globalization and this new system suddenly decided that it was no more for them. You always take a risk when you have such a referendum, just yes or no in a very complicated context.
If France had a referendum, it might have had the same result.
Yeah, probably. In a similar context, but our context was very different. So I don't want to make any. I mean, to take any bet, but I would have definitely fought very hard to win. But I think it's a mistake when you just ask yes or no, when you don't ask people how to improve the situation and to explain how to improve it. As for the Brexit vote, my understanding is that middle classes and working classes, and especially the oldest in your country, decided that the recent decades were not in their favor, and that the adjustments made by both EU and globalization, because for me it was a mix of both of them, was not in their favor.
But surely it was about Europe as well, and the structure of Europe.
And second, I think one of the reasons was precisely an organization of our European Union, probably which gets too far in terms of freedom without cohesion, towards free markets without any rules and any convergence. And I have to say that your governments had some responsibilities in it.
So I remember too neoliberal, perhaps.
But 10 years ago, ultra-liberals on totally and purely free market without any regulation. Because all your people saying the Hungarian workers or the Polish workers are much more favored than I am, it was exactly the debate we had in France 10 to 15 years ago against some directives that a lot of your governments pushed at that time, saying, guys, you are not free market. I do believe in free market. I do believe in a market economy, but we need regulation and convergence.
Your vision seems to me to be deepening Europe. As a response to this, you want a single financial minister over the whole thing, more European taxes, more done at the centre. Again, is that not a terrible risk, given how many European people look at this and say it's too far away already?
No.
I don't feel engaged
because
in this.
It's not just my view. I think what we need is first of all, to have a much more protective Europe. Europe is something which will protect you on digital, environment, migration, collective security, and a fair organization. But I would say, on the mid to long run view of Europe is the following. I do believe that we have a European Union. We will be unhappily 27. But
inevitably, definitely?
I mean, it's on your own. It depends on you. I mean, I do respect this vote. I do regret this vote. And I would love to welcome you again. I can say.
Your vision
but my vision, to be clear.
Of a different Europe.
So my vision, on the very short run, be much more concrete. Less bureaucracy and more concrete answer to protect people and address their issues. Right. More sovereignty, more unity, more democracy. That's the recipe in order to succeed in Europe. If you lose your sovereignty and you don't protect people, they don't believe in you. If you are not based on a democratic approach, they will not follow you. If you are not following this unity, i.e. creating consistency and convergence, they will leave.
You said France is back. What did you mean by that?
I mean that we are delivering reforms which seemed impossible for decades. This is, for me, the pillar, because when you are not credible at home, no chance to be credible outside.
You talk about values, which must involve, presumably, freedom of the press and human rights and so forth. Did you raise those with the Chinese president when you were talking to him last week?
I rose with all the leaders I met. In China, it's absolutely counterproductive to raise it during a press conference. Because, I mean, the political system, the regime, presidency is, I mean, not in a situation, in an environment.
It's not going to help, you think?
I do believe it's totally counterproductive. Okay. So what I did is I had a direct discussion. We have a track to discuss this issue. We decided an organization, and I provided, I would say, visibility and the ability for him to be sure that this is not a diplomacy in front of the camera. But I issued a very clear statement.
Let me ask you, if I may, about that. Yet another leader, and wonder what you thought when you got up in the morning and read what President Trump, I can't say the word, had said about certain African countries, S-hole countries. He denies it, but a lot of people say he used that word. And among the African countries who were outraged and very offended by that were many Francophone countries, many French-speaking countries in Africa. I wonder, did you share their outrage?
For sure.
So,
for sure, it's not a word you can use. And if we want precisely to build peace, development in this country, and a respectful relationship.
You can't use those kind of words.
But by definition, and I think a lot of our issues in both in Middle East and in Africa is due to a lot of frustrations, due to a lot of past humiliations. Yeah. And we have to understand that. And I do believe that we have to respect all the countries. Mm. That's what we owe them, and that's much more efficient. So I have a very direct relationship with President Trump. We have a very good relationship.
You sat down with him for dinner at the top of the Eiffel Tower. I wonder what you make of him as a person, having come across him closely.
Look, I think he is not a classical politician. So first of all, he was elected by the American people. Mm-hmm. He is the president of the United States. And that's a great country and that's a great ally. So I want to work with him, and I think we built a very strong relationship. We disagree on several topics.
Sure.
I call him very regularly. I'm always extremely direct and frank. He is. Sometimes I manage to convince him. And sometimes I fail.
Do you wake up in the morning thinking, what has he tweeted this night?
No, no, because I think we should not overplay the situation and these tweets. Because that's a sort of mix between personal and political reaction. And I think it's not feasible when you're president of a republic like the US Republic, but like the French one.
To respond too much like that. But the reason I'm asking, with a slight smile on my face, but it is very, very serious. We've got something like the North Korean situation. When Trump basically says, my nuclear button's bigger than your nuclear button, a lot of people in the world think this is just slightly unhinged and very dangerous.
Yes, but the best answer you can provide to that is what? Just to say, we have to work very closely and seriously to force North Korea to come back to the table of negotiations. Mm. We have to follow the UN sanctions and implement them. And the critical country in order to deliver is China. And that's what we discussed with President Xi.
And so talking about bringing countries
it's just
back,
calm down everybody.
do you think that there is any chance at all of persuading the Americans to come back to the table on the Paris climate change agreement?
First of all, I don't think there is any option to come back to the table of negotiations to the Paris Agreement. I've always been very clear. It's negotiated and signed. It's just deciding to sign what is done. Why? Because
we have... Sign it then?
But, I mean, we negotiated. 100 and more than 180 countries signed and are being ratifying. Come on, we will not renegotiate for one people. So, I do believe that's a big mistake. I told him, but there is no new negotiation. You join or you don't join. China decided to remain in the loop, and we will deliver. I think we have to accelerate. But what I see is that private sector and states in the US are following this line. They are trying to comply with the agreement. So we will do it.
Very final question. You said you were going to be a Jupiter-like president. What did you mean by that?
I think I never used like that, this expression. When you preside, you have to preside. It's different from governing. And you have to avoid permanent comments, to avoid a sort of day-to-day presence without strong decisions.
You have to have a bit of élan, a bit of gloire.
I would not say that's exactly following sign. You need efficiency, authority, humanity. So that's why the third pillar is not compatible with Jupiter or anything of this kind. But what's important to me, and the message I want to say, is that our credibility is to explain what we want to do, to deliver, to change the country, to prepare the country to the new century. That's what we are doing in France, because that's a precondition to succeed in Europe. And our role in this world is to help everywhere to build peace. That's it. That's my job.
President Macron, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.